He's the man who's walked the razor's edge in Islamabad, navigating back-channel whispers, cyber traps, diplomatic dead ends. As India's envoy during one of the tensest chapters in Indo-Pak ties, Ajay Bisaria didn't just hold the fort, he weathered the storm. And today, Mr. Bisaria lifts the curtain on what really goes behind the high walls of diplomacy. Welcome to Spot On, Ambassador Bisaria.
Thank you, Gauri. Great to be on your show.
Thank you, sir. And as we talk, there seems to be a development every single day in the India-Pakistan story. I call it story because that's how journalists see it. And the two most important developments that really stand out for me is Asim Munir deciding to promote himself after a failed war. How do you see that happening? Probably the first in 6 decades. I want to start with that because simply it's fascinating. How does a failed general go about promoting himself in a country where the general and the government relations have always been very tense?
Well, the things a man will do to get a promotion, it's completely absurd. But in Pakistan, the absurd becomes real. In many ways, the whole Pahalgam attack and all that followed was about Asim Munir. Because if you examine Pakistan's internal dynamics, much of the motivation for the first escalation, which is by Pakistan in Pahalgam, was because Asim Munir felt personally beleaguered. Pakistan was going through a polycrisis. He was the man managing it. The security crisis was a challenge. The internal credibility was a challenge. He was despised within his army because he had tried to give himself a longer term. He was hated by the people because the PTI cadres were really against him. And he was facing a failing economy. And we've seen in Pakistan's history that generals on top like to have a short war with India. Nothing like that to shore up their popularity or credibility.
Another star on their shoulder.
Absolutely. And what happened in the last few days has validated this theory, because essentially what he said was, after this, I have to project a notion of victory. Despite the loss on the battlefield, the notion of victory was projected. This was Victory Day and he got his promotion. So now he has consolidated his regime. So I would say that Pakistan's army chief has achieved his objectives. Pakistan has suffered in this whole episode. Pakistan's army also has suffered, but Pakistan's army chief has won a temporary
battle. He's the
battle.
only gainer.
He's the only gainer, and he has won a temporary battle. It'll catch up with him sooner or later, but at this point of time, he has consolidated his power, and this was really a power game when you look back at it.
And what about the equation between Shahbaz Sharif, Asim Munir? They both, of course, want to keep out Imran Khan. Does this cement their equation further? And does this mean that Imran Khan is unlikely to come back to power? Of course, never say never in politics, more so in Pakistani politics. But how do you read this in the context of Imran Khan?
Well, civil-military relations are always complex in Pakistan, but now there's a great deal of simplicity. This is clearly not just a hybrid regime, but a military regime with a civilian facade. Because what happens after the former General Bajwa goes is that General Asim Munir comes in, and on his watch he has a fake and fabricated election, where the people of the country vote overwhelmingly, perhaps even would have been a 3/4 majority for Imran Khan.
Yeah.
But they manipulate the election, they rig it so that, and get in the Sharif brothers. So Sharif brothers are beholden to Asim Munir for what he has done for them. But now, I think he's asked them to bend, but they're choosing to crawl. The civilians are completely under his thumb. His having given himself this grand new star will make them even weaker. And it'll be the army that will be running the show. Now, on Imran Khan, whether he does a deal, because you see, after getting power, what else do you need? You want credibility. You want to be seen as the army that rules with credibility, and Pakistan's army has through history been in the search for legitimacy, for credibility. And to be more legitimate, they may want to do a deal with Imran Khan, provided he says that I will not criticize you and condemn you and lead agitation against you. So if he does a deal, he might be getting out of the jail and Adiala jail into Banigala, his house, and he might get into some kind of house arrest situation. So it's a dilemma for the PTI. They are crushed by this move by the army, but they may be looking for a deal right now.
In terms of the power dynamics, it's always been tilted towards the army in Pakistan. But in this context, you have a 5-star military general who now pretty much rules Pakistan. Shahbaz Sharif had no political capital, even less now. In the backdrop of that, how do you see the India-Pakistan relationship? Of course, we've been very clear, baat nahi hogi, no talks unless and until there is action on terror. We've been very clear about it. But that power dynamics is sure to have a reflection on this region. How do you read it?
Well, India has been dealing with Pakistan in a pragmatic way. So we have no illusions about the power of the civilians. And I have been an advocate personally of direct conversations with the Pakistan army, because, that's
the power center.
That is the power center, and we don't need to be influencing the internal dynamics of, at least between the civilians and the military. So from India's point of view, an army chief there is not necessarily a bad thing. Our only objective is that they stop terrorism. And that was the purpose of the entire Operation Sindoor.
No, I asked this because Asim Munir, at the beginning of this conversation, you said that, Asim Munir was probably the face behind, how things unfolded after Pahalgam. And with him becoming now even more important, with the civilian government getting even more crushed with his personal weight, that is likely to have a dynamic even in terms of how Pakistan acts or doesn't act on the terror infrastructure that continues to exist on its soil.
Absolutely. So that is a continuing story, the infrastructure of terror. Now, whether Asim Munir finds it useful to dismantle it, Pakistan does not find it useful to dismantle it. Because if in the India context, after the 1971 war, Pakistan decided to have a policy of sub-conventional warfare, or a battle of 1,000 cuts, and using proxy means to challenge India, because it felt that it didn't have the conventional capability. And that reality does not change. And, when you use as your instruments of dealing with India organizations like the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hizbul Mujahideen, who have never attacked you within, but are really instruments for use outside the country, then it doesn't change for you. So there are very few incentives right now for Asim Munir to dismantle the terrorist infrastructure. Yes, we have set up deterrence with Op Sindoor, that it will cost the army a lot to do another act of terrorism. So there will be a lot of thought in case they decide to do another act of terrorism. But there isn't enough disincentive right now to or incentive to dismantle the terrorist infrastructure, where I think the world will have to get together. So there will have to be moves like sanctioning the generals at the UN or at the UNSC Sanctions Committee against the kind of terrorism that they are promoting. So there will have to be more action in order for them to see the wisdom of dismantling the terrorist infrastructure.
And do you think the diplomatic outreach that India has done, unprecedented, the number of countries that we are going to, the number of delegations, do you think that will act as the catalyst to get that global opinion to push for these sanctions and these global measures you're saying?
That is exactly the point of this. The whole outreach that India has done now, when after the fog of war is gone, the dust has settled, that is the purpose. So one of the objectives of all these delegations going out, visiting 30 countries, 60 members of parliament, is essentially to try and reinforce that message. Can this become the 9/11 moment for the world? You recall that after 9/11, every bit of US energy and the energy of the West was on terrorism. That how do we counter terrorism? How do we counter Al-Qaeda? How do we get to their bases in Afghanistan? And that is what India is trying to persuade the world, because, it has hit us today, but it could hit you tomorrow.
Exactly.
And this is a global scourge. We need to be working on it together. And India's got a new security doctrine, or solidified and stated a security doctrine, which is of every act of terror is an act of war, and a zero tolerance to terror doctrine. It's up to the world to accept it, recognize Pakistan as that epicenter, and take steps like sanctioning the generals and, sanctioning Pakistan more directly, getting it back to the FATF grey list.
But here IMF is giving more loans.
Exactly. So now the IMF shrugs and says, look, we are bound by we have to be non-political, we are bound by our charter and so on. And India made the case that these are fungible, this is fungible money. It can be diverted from development to terrorism.
Yeah.
And the IMF makes the case that, look, this is a sanctioned loan of last year, this was an additional tranche and so on. And I think the optics were terrible to have released that tranche
During
on the 9th of May. It was terrible optics. It was a bad idea. But now the IMF seems to be trying to make up with a public conferencing and saying that, they have 11 stiff conditions, and behind the scenes they will try to put a stronger kind of filter on the use by Pakistan. But what India's diplomacy must attempt, and possibly will attempt, is to get the world completely sensitized here, so that FATF-like conditions enter the IMF loans as well. And because the IMF says we are only about balance of payments, we don't go into anything else. But, our point would be that you need to structurally change Pakistan for it to become a better economy. And that is by stopping the export of terrorism and stopping the capture of the army on the economy.
Absolutely.
So I think the IMF and the world has to do better by using IMF as only one of the instruments, but also having others.
Absolutely.
And particularly sanctioning the ISI and the army, which is behind this.
The top guys in the deep state.
Exactly.
You mentioned about, how it is an ongoing process. I want to delve into your stint in Pakistan, the challenges that you faced, and even the risks that were involved in representing India as our High Commissioner in Pakistan.
Well, Pakistan is full of paradoxes. So a lot of the times people going from India, they see the nice cuddlier side of Pakistan, the friendliness, and at the level of the people, and it is genuine enough. But at the level of the state, there is deep hostility. And I say that in Pakistan, there's a lot of lurking hostility beneath the surface, and also there's a lot of lurking goodwill. So the challenge of our diplomacy when I was there was to sort of deal with this hostility, but also try to understand the lurking goodwill and make use of it in some of the people-to-people connections that we made. But there is no doubt that we have to deal with this state which exports terrorism. And now, at least for the last 3 decades, the primary plank of our relationship is that it is a counter-terrorism strategy.
Yeah.
What we need to ensure is that this country we can coexist with, and it doesn't send terrorists to India. But the fundamental problem is that they have what Christine Fair calls the strategic culture of persistent revisionism. India is a status quoist power. We are fine with our borders. We are fine with our boundaries. We don't want claim territories. But Pakistan has this artificial culture when they say that Kashmir is a jugular vein, that makes it not just a territorial objective, a biological objective, because you're saying it's my vein, it's part of my body. So there's a structural problem in the way the army captures Pakistan, and then imposes its policy. If
And then it's top down, isn't it?
exactly.
That's how it
So,
is.
so if they had civilian filters and the army had this hostility, but the civilians were trying to control it, it would have been a different story. But right now, it's the army telling the civilians, I will run the India policy, and that is based on hostility to India, that is based on using terrorism,
Yes.
and you don't interfere. So, the civilians are only sort of floundering and taking the lead and trying to defend them, but they don't really have a say.
They exist on the fringe. Essentially, it is the army. Interesting, there was a specific case where, my team in fact told me this, that at a wedding you had faced intense surveillance in Islamabad, and they were telling me that, this was an instance that we must ask Ambassador Bisaria to talk about, because this gives an insight into how the life is for India's High Commissioner in Pakistan, isn't it? What happened at that particular instance?
So there are multiple such instances. I went, for instance, to visit Panja Sahib. Our groups of Sikh delegates used to come.
Yeah.
And I also went to Nankana Sahib and the holy Sikh shrines. And Panja Sahib, the ISI came and blocked my car and suddenly said that you can't go in. And I said, why? I have got all the permissions. And then they said, look, some of the people inside are agitated. They don't want the Indian High Commissioner to be there. So somewhere in their system, somebody realized that they ought to play a game with this. So what really happens is, even in social occasions, going for a wedding, you're not sure if somebody will block your way or somebody will put a camera on 2 inches from your face and start to film you.
Yeah.
So it is some kind of harassment that does take place. And we try to wear a very thick skin when we work in Pakistan and ignore all this stuff, because at the people's level there is goodwill, and the people themselves feel embarrassed by, they say, these
outward
thugs.
hostility.
Yes, these thugs, these gundas from the ISI who come and try to play games there. So more than myself, I was worried about my staff, because I had protection, but a lot of my staff went unprotected, and they have a history of abducting even diplomats and then and assaulting them physically. So it is a bit of a Wild West situation there. It is slightly, physically dangerous, but it is what it is. And after a point, we started saying that we will be completely reciprocal, because you have an embassy and a high commission here, so please don't do stuff there, because we can play that game too.
And the fact that we've expelled and demarched for 2 of Pakistani High Commission officials here in the backdrop of that spy ring that has come to notice. Explain to us, this world of spies, because this is something that for us, it's like an average YouTuber. She may be coming out with videos that some of us may find at best offensive, but that's where it would stop, right? How does this happen, this ring of spies that Pakistan is trying to sort of get by, and India managed to bust all of it? The Jyoti Malhotra YouTuber case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is what happens when you have a country run by an army, and the ISI is its primary instrument. So what Pakistan does is embeds among its diplomats a lot of ISI people. And what they tend to do is, if all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. So what you try to do is then recruit assets and get people. So they may be perfectly innocent YouTubers or perfectly innocent people who are trying to promote goodwill or doing their job, but they would try to capture them, honey trap them, turn them around, give them, induce them with money or whichever way, and try to turn them around. So it won't necessarily be a ring of spies, it will be a collection of assets that you can use these assets to get more information and so on. And they do it brazenly and do it to much more of an extent. Every embassy in the world does have a covert capacity to monitor the country they are in. But this, for Pakistan, they take it to new levels. And that is what becomes objectionable from our point of view, because we are watching them, we know exactly what is happening, and therefore in times like this, we have to check them.
After Pulwama, you were called back. That's the time when, you know, tensions between India and Pakistan really started soaring. And since then, of course, Pahalgam happened a couple of years later. Talk to us about that particular time, because that really did test whatever may be the delicate situation between India and Pakistan. It was tested because there was another terror attack that came from Pakistan. You were our High Commission there. You were called back. What was it like? What happened? The initial moments when all those things were unraveled. Tell our viewers.
Yeah, so I think it was very interesting, and it was really speaking Pulwama to Balakot and the return of the Indian pilot Abhinandan.
Yeah.
That episode was just about 15 days. And I was in Islamabad when Pulwama happened. And I had to, the then Foreign Secretary asked me to come back because the Cabinet Committee on Security decided I should come back. They didn't close the mission or recall me, withdraw me. They said I should come back for consultations.
Yeah.
So I had to do something very quickly to get out because the Pakistani agencies were watching me. They wanted to get me to the Foreign Office for the démarche, and I said, I'm not coming. My instructions are to go back. So I just grabbed a bag and went to the airport. Normally, I would have gone to Wagah and crossed on foot. But, there I am vulnerable. So I just took a flight out into West, into Dubai, and came from there. But, what happened at that point was pretty much similar to what happened now after Pahalgam and let's say Pahalgam to ceasefire. So Pulwama to Balakot and to the return of the pilot was 15 days.
Yes.
And this time from Pahalgam 22nd April to 10th May was about 20 days. And what we did was, in terms of taking action, the same. We set up an action in Balakot. Pakistan tried to respond, and we said we'll take the next step.
Yeah.
But they had the Indian pilot, and we said we will go to the next level of escalation, and it could have been something like what you saw on the 7th of May, which is an attack on terrorist targets, unless the pilot is returned. And that credible threat of force is what caused or made Pakistan return the pilot, and therefore it got de-escalated. Within a week of that, I was back. The Cabinet Committee on Security then decided, go back, try diplomacy. So, we always give diplomacy a chance. That is India's instinct. And my conversation...
Did it work when you went back immediately after?
Well, to some extent, yes, because Pakistan then said we will take they didn't directly relate it to this, our action, but they said, no, we are in any case going to take action against terrorists. And they were talking about de-radicalizing and removing terrorists and so on. So it did have some impact that, we did some counter-terrorism diplomacy, asking them to change their behavior. And therefore, I think it is useful to have diplomatic missions open and diplomats talking to each other, because it opens a channel of messaging that, they know how angry India is and what India wants to accomplish is something that can be conveyed directly and bilaterally. But after Article 370, then
that's
Pakistan,
when they snapped everything, and they just,
exactly.
I think they stopped trade ties immediately after that. Imran Khan was the Prime Minister that time.
That's right. Yeah. And we had, after Pulwama, stopped trade or imposed a new tariff on trade and so on.
Yes, we did, yeah.
And asked me to, but we replaced our High Commissioner. We still had full working missions. But after Article 370, they asked India to withdraw the High Commissioner. So I was back after that. And, then they overreacted to that adjustment that India made within its borders and couldn't really get out of that situation. So, but, in a sense, the deterrence that we set up in Balakot worked for a while, worked for 5 or 6 years, and now for reasons internal to Pakistan, to Asim Munir, they decided to overcome it get on and challenge India once again.
Last question before we get into the rapid fire segment of the podcast, which is that you mentioned about back channel communications, how diplomacy can provide those breakthroughs. Early in your career, you've had a distinguished career. Any diplomatic lesson that held you in good stead in moments like this that you would like to share?
Well, one of the lessons I learned is that we live in interesting times, because I started my career after the Cold War was just about ending, and I was posted in the Soviet Union in Moscow. So there were tectonic changes then. The Soviet Union collapsed, the Cold War ended, and so on. And I think the lesson I learned was that you need to step back, take a few deep breaths, realize where the point of time in history, and then take actions and not make very hurried judgments. And that's why the title of my book is Anger Management.
Yes.
That, let's not react in anger when we're diplomats. So like anger, diplomacy is also a dish best served cold. That you make your plans, you get a measure of your objectives, and then you try and achieve them.
Perfect.
So what happened to me is that it was I watched the Soviet Union break up, and then I was posted in Germany when Germany
reunification was taking
reunification took place.
Yes.
I was posted in Poland when Brexit took place. So Europe almost broke down. I was in Canada when all kinds of stuff was happening. So often my friends hold me responsible for all these actions.
Oh, you've seen history firsthand. That's what one can say, yes. But that's an important lesson, sir. And now I come to what I think is probably one of the most interesting segments of the podcast, which is the rapid fire. And quick questions, quick answers, as it means. One sentence to describe what it feels like reading about yourself in leaked Pakistani cables.
A little embarrassing.
What's the most unusual thing you ever packed for a diplomatic mission?
Oh, I can't tell you that. I'll have to shoot you if I tell you. Yeah.
If your diplomatic career had a movie title, what would it be?
Anger Management.
Anger Management. Which world leader would you love to do a podcast with? No translators allowed.
Certainly today, Donald Trump. Because I'd love to have Trumpisms come out of him and just try to get deep into the recesses of his mind.
Indeed. And what's one lesson from diplomacy everyone could use in marriage?
Anger management.
What's tougher, negotiating with a hostile diplomat or finding good coffee in Islamabad?
Well, I think finding good coffee. Yeah.
I thought as much. Thank you so much, sir. This was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.